The purpose of today's conference has been to try to make sure that there is more information out in the public place to help inform decision makers, because obviously the public news is all very doom and gloom and very difficult. But I think, as you've been starting to hear today, whilst the money has changed and it's in more specific locations and you have to look a bit harder for it, the actual experience of doing things on the ground is different from what the public perception is, and therefore we've heard from some of the operators talking about what their experiences are. Now you're going to be hearing from some of the advisors who see a lot of the operations, as well as Alexander representing another company which is actually doing things on the ground in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So it's a good opportunity to hear as to what people are seeing and some of the trends which perhaps aren't in the public domain at the moment, as far as certainly not in the high level. So we're going to have a panel discussion covering a lot of the technical aspects, and then later on there's going to be another panel discussion which will again talk about some of the practical aspects and where things are going. First of all, I'd like to introduce the panel. So I'll start off on my right with BOIKO. Yulia is the General Director for Wardell Armstrong International, based in Moscow. Previously she was based in Kazakhstan, so she's got a very good in-depth knowledge of both countries. Environmental specialist by background, but she's talked a lot about geological and other aspects as well, so she'll be able to cover a wide range of subjects. Mike HALLEWELL is the Business Development Director for SGS for Europe. He's again got a good practical experience, having been on the assaying side with mining companies, but now also with SGS. SGS are well known as far as providing various services for assaying and so on, but they're also strongly involved with outsourcing and providing their skills into areas which previously were lacking in skills, and therefore be able to comment a lot more on the trends there. Alexander is the Chief Operating Officer for Orsu Metals and is who have operations in Kazakhstan and also Kyrgyzstan. Orsu Metals is a developer, and they're taking projects up, so there's a combination of exploration and development. And ALEXEY is the Regional Manager for CSA Global. Has been working in the region a lot, has a great understanding of the various technical aspects, the various comparisons of the JORC and the 9 systems, and will be able to comment as far as the perspective that he sees. So welcome to our panel. We're also going to have the opportunity to ask some of our previous speakers questions, so if we don't answer any of the questions that you've got, then please feel free to ask the other panelists. So I'm going to start off with a nice general set of questions. Our focus is looking at the technical aspects and seeing how things are changing. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists a question as to which example would they give as to how they think that mining companies in Russia and Kazakhstan, the region, can improve. And I'm going to start off with Yulia on my right.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. I'm not going to talk straight about the sanctions. Let's try and avoid that for at least a little bit. But basically, from our observations as consultants, and I'm sure SRK and CSA Global and other consultants, our observation has been that everything pretty much starts from the basics, and that is how you explore and report your resources and reserves. Of course, I wouldn't mention any names of any of our large clients. Among those corporates, vertically integrated mining houses, even they are still at the beginning of actually getting it right. So the answer is pretty much starts with the basics. When we are employed to report, to help those companies report their resources and reserves and subsequently their NPV and worth on the market, it's pretty tough when we really cannot do that because we cannot get the base, because the basics are not there. Thanks.
Thank you, Yulia. So, Mike?
Is it working? Yeah. As Dave says, I've spent a lot of my life working before I joined SGS with Western major companies. So I've got a good perspective of how people like Rio, Anglo run particularly process operations and mine-to-mill operations. I've spent a lot of my time working in geometallurgical sphere in the last sort of 5 years. One of the areas that I see, one of my areas I specialise in is auditing plants. And probably the most reoccurring issue that is a simple issue is just the lack of automation out there. Some of the major operations are embracing what I would call rudimentary levels of automation. I'm talking specifically in plants, but it is not a complete automated package. And I know that those operations can squeeze more gold or more base metals or whatever it is out of their ore by embracing more automation and trusting the automation to run the plant for them to a level ultimately where you would have advanced control. Most of the majors out there are in the West, and I think Rio particularly are leading in a lot of this area, embrace those new technologies, and Russia and Central Asian companies really need to look hard at their level of automation that they're employing in their plants, particularly with view to getting another 5% throughput, another X% recovery from their ore types. I'll leave it at that, Dave.
Alexander?
I would like to add to this that about 2 or 3 years ago I visited the Wardell collaboration in Kazakhstan, and Panelists is fully automated, fully computerized from the stove to the crusher.
There are some.
But it's not what we do as a company. What we do as a company, we try to pick up greenfield projects or projects likely tested in solid times, and then basically to bring them into production and if successful basically to construction if you can successfully finance it. One of the issues of Kazakhstan and Russia that many people say that it has tremendous geological potential. I would like to say that we are trying to unlock it. The property which we have has about 10 million tons grading 1.7% copper. Even if this is difficult to finance it in the current environment. But I would like to say that during the last 3 to 6 months there is more interest. Before we are trying to unlock it, but also some people that like people coming to us, which is very positive. Kazakhstan, unlike Russia, is not affected directly at least by the sanctions, and also it has some advantages in terms of being the member of the customs union. Before 2010 revolution in Kyrgyzstan, for example, ALEXEY laboratory was the major customer for all exploration companies operating in Central Asia, but then essentially the border was closed between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan just because of unrest in Kyrgyzstan. But after formation of the customs union, now we can enjoy what foreign laboratories have in Russia, for example, like SGS and Cruise in Chita. And we collect our samples in Kazakhstan and during the customs union we can send them to Russia, although in Kazakhstan itself there are bureaucratic issues and it's not as easy to open such analytical operations as, for example, it was in Kyrgyzstan and Russia. There is bureaucracy in place obviously, but it is manageable, it takes time, but I would say that overall, being Russian, I say that it's easier to operate operationally in Kazakhstan than in Russia. And also, such extreme examples like we saw from civil awareness also that when you have to go 400 kilometers on winter roads, on rivers, especially in Kazakhstan, you can go everywhere else. Infrastructure which was built in Soviet times is excellent. Near our property, we have a power line just 10 kilometers away and road just 10 kilometers away. All we have to do is to build a link. In that sense, Kazakhstan is a great place to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexey?
Thank you, David. Look, I would start with almost non-existent exploration, which was mentioned by probably everybody in this room, and that is limited not by technology but rather by legislation. But then it also generates another problem, which also was mentioned, is that most of the operations are legacy operations, which essentially means that it's being run on old, and it's also limited by legislation in the sense it's being run by old practices and without having applied all the modern techniques starting from geological modeling and computerized mine planning and then going further to get more automation in other areas. So if talking about single point, I think that we really require first change of legislation, but we're not discussing that, and then probably moving further into modernized technologies in legacy operations, which is majority of them.
Thank you. From our perspective, we're working on several projects at the moment to help companies reduce their costs, because obviously, as you know, elsewhere in the world, you know, the minerals prices are going down, and therefore the good times are over, and people have now got to be smarter. This is proving to be a particular challenge in Russia, but at the same time probably an opportunity, because they've been happy to work with the legacy technologies and the legacy data in the past, but without getting some of their basics right, they haven't got the attention to detail that we would expect, as in the details from the geological models which help you understand, you know, where the gold is or where the metal is, what happens when you blast it, and therefore where has it gone to. You know, lack of attention to making sure when you blast it you don't move it all around the country, that you keep it in one location. The attention to understanding the productivities, these aspects, you know, why are you operating this equipment, why not switch it off, the understanding of the costs, these sorts of details we feel they don't exist yet down at the operational level, and this is an area which the guys are quite keen to hear about. So there's, as far as the opportunities to reduce costs, there are, I think, significant opportunities in Russian and Kazakh companies just by going in, getting some of the basics right, getting some of the detail right, getting an understanding of the costs. They will come. That is going to be one of the things that I have observed in Russia and Kazakhstan, is when change happens, it happens very quickly. And when they start deciding, okay, we're going to do this, that we're going to see these technologies come in a big way and go through the operations. Talking about geological modelling, I mean, I'd like to know, you know, how much you're seeing. I know we've obviously seen some companies going down the geological modelling, but Yulia, as far as your experience of how much is being used on the ground and how advanced it is.
Bless you, Rod. It is certainly being in fashion nowadays, whereas if you look at 2008, 2009, when companies were going public on ALEXEY or TSX or anywhere else for that matter, the funds were so easily available. Whereas right now, the investors, fair enough, want to know how those valuations are derived, and they are derived from what's beneath the ground and how well you can prove that. Certainly it is being in fashion, and not only for the resources but also the reserves. which is when you apply all the modifying factors and run a model and derive your NPV. That's when it's reserves, if NPV is not below 0, which is currently very hard to achieve due to the falling metal prices. However, the stock exchanges do not really accept no JORC or CIM or any other non-compliant resource or reserves. So it's pretty much becoming mandatory. But there is a hearsay that Kazakhstan, for example, with its opening doors, visa-free regime for a year and all of that, 2015 is going to be a party where where the resources are going to be reported and reserves for the State Committee of Reserves in accordance with JORC. Prove me wrong, I'm sure there are many hearsays, but a lot of you who are familiar with the matter would probably be able to confirm that. So that's actually very positive, which means the companies do not have to spend all this money on super expensive consultants like ourselves and actually have one resource estimation and reserves estimation as opposed to 2 or however many. What do you think?
I'll come to that number. Alexey, as far as the geological modelling, how widespread is it at the moment, and how's the rate of change as far as the adoption of modern methods?
Well, I'd say we're now after the first place, so everybody pretty much is using the software. The problem is that not always it is used in the proper way. For example, it's quite often when companies use resource models for mining without doing further, exploration to that and an enhancement of the model to make it appropriate for mining. On the other hand side, we also see big demand from mining companies in this region for some, we train them to use the software for reconciliation and grade control. So they are, as you mentioned, they are very much concerned about the head grade, and they try to use software to solve this problem, which is a good sign, and it's a good one. So I'd say that it is widespread, but not always used appropriately.
Okay, thank you. So moving on beyond the geological modelling and moving into some of the operational aspects, and Mike, you commented on some of the automation aspects, but as far as the other general use of technology, the embracement of modern techniques or not, how do you see the trends in Russia and Kazakhstan, and is there a difference between the different countries?
Yeah, I think slowly but surely there is an embracement of the technologies. There is a kind of an inertia to embrace more in the oligarch majors for me, but maybe if anyone out there does differently, I apologise, but that's really what I'm seeing. Slowly but surely, technology has to come in and innovate the industry. Ernst & Young recently issued a report for a global perspective that the industry has to innovate. It's hard times out there. Everybody's suffering, and everyone needs to look at what they can do with their current operations and get the most shareholder value. So technology, there's a lot of new technologies out there, from drone technology coming in now, automation in plants and advanced systems, as I mentioned, automatic core logging, and recently, for instance, there was a new Australian invention where cyanide can be made on site from methane and air, to save you shipping cyanide to sites, which may be very attractive to to remote gold operations. These things will, I'm sure, be embraced. I think one of the things that slows down the Russian pace is Dave has touched on the bureaucracy involved, and one of the things that is a very good asset within Russia is the strict code of SOPs that is conducted across operations. And that's a really good point, because the operators will not deviate from that. But it turns around as a weakness when we want people to be innovative, because they struggle to think outside of that box. So getting people to think outside of a strict protocol is a challenge that I see in Russia, and that I would encourage whatever you can do to make that more flexible, to speed up the rate of embracement of technologies across the industry.
Alexander, on the other side, you're the person who has to actually decide whether your team is going to embrace the technologies or not, because it's going to cost money. Is this something that you feel is the major opportunity for making sure your teams have a modern focus, or is the technology more a case of, well, we'll consider everything on a case-by-case basis?
If you talk about development, which we are not doing at the moment, but as part of our DFS, which was done by SRK, we were actually planning to run the entire mining operation based on portable analysis, and this will reduce our costs in terms of what kind of quality to have on site. And for example, my list, which I mentioned before, it's around analysis completely through all stages. They know what grades they mine at the store, what goes into the basically into the crushable side, what kind of grades they have, so they can easily control. So we're going to do something like this. Also, we decided to invest money into quite expensive GPS system, which will help actually to do surveying much faster with this service. It will be, if in production, this will be quite a modern operation. But we are doing mostly exploration at the moment because financing is a bit stuck. And for exploration geologists, we train them all to use 3D software. They use it right on site. We have to drill with the hole. So they see, at least mineralogical, what they drill through, they understand 3D measures, what they do. Also, they have an internet satellite-based system, and via internet access information when drilling operations are going every day, basically by 10 a.m. in the morning, and I have all these reports in place. And people can't imagine how they will work the old way, like basically doing everything by hand, or just on a piece of paper. I still prefer to do something by hand. But I would like to say that local people and we employ young geologists who are on the certain mission, train them well, and they do working on this.
The last question I asked to the panel before opening up to the audience is how well do people understand the costs of doing things, and therefore how do they take into account costs when making decisions on strategies? I mean, Yulia, what are you seeing as far as the general understanding within organisations about how much it costs to operate equipment, how much it costs to make changes, or the benefits of saving to the processing plant by spending more money on explosives in the mining area, for example?
Well, previously, around 3-4 years ago, our clients were asking us for help to spend money, and now the clients are asking for help on cutting costs and reduce expenditure. Previously, they were looking for projects to acquire or list. Right now, they're looking for projects that can be just be rid of. And in terms of the processing costs and so on and so forth. The clients believe more the cost, specifically cost-cutting consultants. We can come in, we can advise where we can, but it's a very niche accountancy dependent, I would say. If you really want to cut costs, then you go to other rivals, but not less technical, I would say, who would go out to the site and spend a month or two monitoring and then helping you to take your money and then to capitalize on that.
From our perspective, I guess the points we see is the starting point is that the mining companies work with the information they've got back from their accountants as far as what the costs are. Now, these costs have been put into various formats. Like in Russia, most of the operations work with the 1S accounting system, and there is a formulaic structure as far as how you will account for your costs. But as a result, they don't necessarily have the details. So, for example, one mine they're working at, they don't split the details of the costs they're spending on shovels or dozers or graders into the different categories, so they don't actually know how much it costs to operate a shovel. They don't know how much a dozer costs. So they don't have that detail to be able to to be able to optimise things. Also, we tend to see people working in silos, so the benefits that could be done by changing practices in the maintenance department in order to benefit the operating team, they don't see that benefit, they see it all in separate groups. And I see that Arthur has come down in order to try and chivvy us on a bit, so I shall stop talking on this side and ask if there's any questions that the audience have got for any of the panellists. Well, there is time to ask some questions, so don't feel afraid. A question? Can I have a microphone, and then if you just introduce yourself. So this is also, it can be recorded, and so there's a record.
I'm Stan Bartlett from MINEX International, and my question is related to this notion of legacy technology. And I wonder what is the panel forecast for the trend to unlink the hinge between design projects, the actual to be built in the field, and the design institutes in Russia that may not be using the best technology.
Alexey, I think you mentioned legacy projects and so on.
Well, as I said, as you also mentioned, it is driven by legislation. There is a discussion now to change the classification, but essentially we also connect this change to basically abolishing the ALEXEY, as you know it, which is a major limitation that exists and which puts most of the stuff. So we see a certain interest in that, but we don't really see any real action. But on the other hand side, if you are talking to very specific operation, you will probably see that they may decide to have this artificial project and then act on properly made planning, made in tools and with proper qualification.
Any comments from anybody else?
I think on the cost front, I'll just touch on what Dave was mentioning. One of the things I very often see in the plants in Russia is a very high focus on getting certification of certain procedures. A lot of effort goes into that area. The area that is overlooked is the effectiveness of the operation. So the effective KPIs, a lot of those are missing, and the ways to measure effective use of either cost, power, or breaking down metallurgy into specific areas is something which I see as lacking at the moment. In some of you will be doing it. If you are, good for you. But for generally, that's what I see. So it's not so much it's a misunderstanding of causation effect. What causes this, and what does that cost? That is a fundamental thing I think Dave has touched on in the pit, and so far I'm seeing that in plants a lot.
Stan, specifically, I think that there isn't a lot of appetite for making formal change, but as mentioned, the operators are quite good at being able to get around the various rules and implement things where they can see the advantages. There are still some restrictions, so like when you take a new project forward, you have to take it to blood loss expertise to be approved, and they do basically a simple check. Does it follow the GOSTs and SNPs or not? But being Russia, they then, after that's been approved according to the standards, you can then go around the corner to Rostechnosor and you can go and ask them for an exemption and be able to follow a different approach. So, for example, the development of a continuous ramp. Because at the moment in Russia, the standards are that you have a ramp, then a flat section, then a ramp and a flat section, in order to allow when the trucks, when they go downhill, to cool off. Now, that's because of the old designs. All the modern trucks produced by Belarus or the Chinese manufacturers all comply with the ISO standards. So you can then go around the corner to Rostechnosor, present that, and they will then give you an exemption to be able to come back with a change of design, which then allows you a continuous ramp. So there's a significant inertia. There's ways around it if the guys can see the values and the benefits. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Don't forget, you can also ask any of the previous speakers as well. I think Arthur's presence is sort of like seeing a few more. There's another question. Yes, excellent. Nice.
Hi, actually, this is a question for James Redden. Hi, my name is Rania. I'm with Banking Pages. You mentioned something about Russia becoming more looking on specific metals like rare earths and tin, tungsten, platinum. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? How will this work? I mean, where will these metals be sold? Is there a domestic market? Who's buying? If Russia is not no longer exporting or looking to export, what can you just talk through this dynamic?
Yeah, so I think the point I was trying to make was that it's not so much an inward looking as much as inward support, internal support in developing this infrastructure to support these projects, the development and exploration, in order to shift, to enable the export towards the prime consuming markets that would be China and Asia. So I think that this is a knock-on effect, as one of the slides showed. One of the effects of the Western sanctions would be that China is going to become more to the fore in terms of consuming these 2.0 commodities, among which tungsten, among which tin. And the focus of the Russian government at the federal and regional level would be to support the infrastructure in order to facilitate the logistics routes and the commercial relationship with China. That's it.
I think possibly one last question. That way we can keep Arthur hanging here in the suspense. Any last questions? Yes, you're.
Keep Arthur in the seat. Question from Louise on Skoyvia. How can you possibly pay $27.5 million for geological database when you could buy your whole mine for that? Could you elaborate, please?
I think the key point to make is the order of magnitude difference. I think in terms of what we've got at Sekisovskoye, we've currently identified 5 million ounces of gold there, but I think the nearby licences at Karasuskoye is 190 square kilometres, and there's potential for them to contain a lot more than one Sekisovskoye within that licensed area. As I said in the presentation, according to sort of our internal estimates and historic GKZ work, we think there's at least 9 million ounces of gold there, which would equate to around $3 an ounce in terms of what we've paid, which I think most people will agree is a relatively small amount.
Right. I guess we can't keep Arthur in suspension any longer, so I'd like to say thank you very much.